Okay, so more on my vegan vegan weaponry, and basically a citizen's force or militia or a volunteer service, something that ties in with Aussies being able to give their time and be rewarded with equipment that's tax deductible, made for non-profit for the purpose of defending Australia. Okay, so some other places where I see all of these things, uses for all of these things, apart from, you know, just a militia, just for war fighting or anything like that. I want, coming from a prepping background, everything's got to be multi-purposed, and as long as things are multi-purposed, that's when they become cheap. You can use them for multiple different uses and use them instead of having things just sitting around and not being used. Use them. Give our volunteers, give our cadets, give our reservists things to do. Give our Air Force pilots, our Army and Navy pilots something to do. Okay, so where they can volunteer their spare time, or they could take annual leave to help in a crisis that our country needs help. Okay, so a couple of other things that have come up recently, and I thought this would be perfect. Okay, over here you can see Australia has territories or land masses here and here, Christmas Island and Cocos Island, basically within 1,000 k's ish to 2,000 k's of Java and this main strait here. This is a main sea channel, okay, and it's basically about 3,500 kilometers from up here where the Malacca Strait is. So these are major shipping lanes. Now, I've seen videos of it and I've heard reports before, and actually everybody would be aware of the Chinese have been sending huge fishing fleets of just shit boats out, and they're swarming good fishing areas around the Pacific, the South China Sea, coming into the Indian Ocean, all around these other little places like the Philippines and Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam, Thailand, etc. You know, and they're using bully tactics. They're ramming other local small fishing vessels. They're bullying them, and it seems like they're backed by the CCP to do that, and the Coast Guard and the Chinese Navy. So either this is another area where these sorts of vehicles could come into play. We could help our neighbours produce these things, because if we get along with our neighbour, just like in normal suburbia, even if you don't like your neighbour or you don't particularly go for barbecues at your neighbour, but you stay on talking terms, you know they're sort of half decent, but it's always good to say g'day and be on good terms with your neighbours, especially if they're okay sort of people, because then you know that that's another good person in your street. It's even better if you get on with them extremely well, because if there's trouble in your street, these all come together. The men of the street come together and they sort out the problem, nip it in the bud straight away. Don't let it get out of hand. Okay. Same thing with our neighbours, whether it's Papua New Guinea, Indonesia, New Zealand. It doesn't matter who it is. You know, we should have good correspondence with these people. So we play sports amongst each other. We do defence ties. We should be doing agricultural things with our neighbours, helping them with industry, you know. And that way, if we get along great with our neighbours and we help them with certain things and they help us with certain things, we have like an agreement to help each other in a time of need, whether that's natural disaster or what. But in a warfare scenario, if we were to give Indonesia, you know, $100 million a year in some sort of aid, or a couple of $100 million, in the long term, and build a strong relationship, in the long scheme of things, that's cheap. Because if we need permission from them, and India needs permission from them, and Malaysia and Thailand, etc., to fight an adversary like China. We basically need permission from them to operate in their waters, use their airspace, etc. So it's a very good idea that we get along with these guys. So if we can help them and work with them to build things like this, even if they're not building the complete plane, a complete submarine, a complete internal combustion engine, but they make components, and we can subcontract these like little components and share wealth all around our neighborhood, even if they're only supplying us with the stuff. We can also, give a little country like Tonga, Fiji, Niue Island or somewhere like that. They could give us raw materials, and then we can give them power. So you're not burning fossil fuels and things like that. We could give them the industrial side of things that they can then go have cheap green power for their little nations. So it's about looking after your neighbours. I'll leave it at that, and I'll come back with talking about these Chinese fishing fleets. So back to these Chinese fishing fleets and these Australian territories and islands, and looking after our other neighbours, helping our other neighbours enforce fishing zones for their own people. So their economies and their little communities that have always made their livelihoods from the ocean. We keep that money. We keep their livelihoods and their customs going. Okay, so Australian dive boats and diving businesses keep reporting about Indonesian and Chinese and other people fishing in our shores, and then Australia Customs goes out and they capture a few of them illegally fishing in our waters, and they usually round them up, bring them back here, process them, give them a slap on the wrist. They might imprison them for a little while, then they send them home and they burn their boats. And I've noticed that the Chinese have been doing this and bullying their neighbours quite a fair bit, and they're getting huge numbers of ships and they're ramming smaller guys who can't defend themselves. So this is where I see something like this coming involved, and practice. It's all hands on deck practice and experience, and it helps with logistics down the track in case of a bigger, more, a hot conflict. We've got experience. Okay, so if we were to have some small submarines and they were just reconnaissance vessels, they didn't do much, and they were sitting out in these known fishing areas. This is just for Australia, but it can be expanded to everywhere else. So we have our little submarines. They're just small midget submarines, 2-3 man, and they just sit out here constantly. Say we have a little seaplane. It's very small, float plane. It carries, a pilot and a passenger and some equipment, or 3 passengers and a pilot. Or you can also have the float so they can skim water, fill up the floats, and then dump the water onto bushfires. Okay, so we can make it multi-role. Now, these little submarines that are out at sea, they don't have to be submarines that dive deep. They're just made of plastic. They're very, very basic analog technology, but with a few smarts, especially while we're not in full-on warfare. But they're just gathering intelligence. They're finding and tracking where these illegal fishing boats are coming from. The little submarines that are out here, or surface vessels, it doesn't matter. They can be resupplied by float planes, obviously depending on weather conditions. But then a float plane can come in, he can land, a submarine can come to the surface, change crews over, refuel, resupply, plane leaves, submarine goes back under the water. These could be on rotating shifts, etc. And it could be anywhere. could be all the way up patrolling in between Australia and Papua New Guinea for drugs, guns, you know, illegal immigration and things like that. Now, say we have Chinese vessels, say we have anybody's vessels, that is, that are illegal contraband, whether it's fishing, guns, people smuggling, etc., drugs. If these little submarines can then radio in or communicate with our planes, then we have some fast assets that can fly in, and then our pilots can get some training for dropping bombs. Now, not bombing the boats in specific, but they could be dropping entanglement lines with float, so the boats drive over the top of them, entangle the propellers, maybe drop nets with float, so there's a nice grid pattern and etc. The propellers get caught up in that slows them down, and then that'll give our customs people time to get to them, and then they can make their arrest. They can hop on board. You could even have multiple planes or whatever and entangle them, and then you have people who go on board these vessels, search them and apprehend people if they've done anything wrong, confiscate their boats, etc. You know, and I'd rather see the boats getting taken to somewhere, pulled apart, have all the oil and stuff taken out of them, rather than just burn them and just pollute the water. Okay, that's just my little bit of greenie coming out of me. I'd prefer to do it cleanly if I could. And also, don't just bring them back here, process them and send them back. Bring them here, take them out into the middle of Australia and break rocks, dig holes, pick up papers along our bloody highways. Get them into that 40 plus degrees, 50 degrees heat for months and months or years on end. Make them work so they do not want to do that anymore. Our prison system should be doing that as well. You go out into the middle there where nobody wants to volunteer to work, and you're put to work. You don't work, your sentence gets longer. You stay there longer. Let Mother Nature punish them. Okay, so then they can think about, do I want to steal cars? Do I want to be a drug dealer anymore? Do I want to be a drink driver anymore? No, I don't want to do that, because then I have to go out there for 12 months or more working in 50-degree heat, and there's nowhere to escape to. Everywhere you go is 50-degree heat, you know. So we can stop their fishing, and we can get some free labour out of them, and they get taught a lesson before they go home, because you're not going to become a citizen here. So, and in a roundabout sort of a way, why don't we do that everywhere? Help our neighbours do that, you know? And again, let's start pushing China back here. These Chinese vessels that are going around ramming everyone, just continuously disrupt their propellers, you know, with nice fast little planes that come in, drop their entanglement lines, fly away, have submarines watching them. Just as they're sort of untangled again and they're making their getaway, more planes come in, and just keep doing it, and then start harassing the Chinese. And if we had little planes from all of these little nations, and we start sending from here volunteers from all around the world, like Sea Shepherd, why doesn't Sea Shepherd get involved in this? And then they can tentacles and pulling power and money that they've got. Why don't they invest in some of this stuff? Go to some of these little island nations that are going to allow them to operate like that, and really start smashing these bastards. You know, I hear about them all the way down here, illegally whaling, illegally fishing down in the southern oceans. You know, let's smash these bastards. Let's start driving them back, blockading them, pushing them back into their little thing, and, you know, start containing these bastards, because at the end of the day, none of us wanted this. They're the ones who want to be top dog in the world. They see America as a vulnerable place. they want to upset the status quo, and they're the ones who are tipping us towards, with all their threats towards China,
Taiwan.
they're the ones who are making us starting an arms race in this area, and they're the ones who are making us basically coming to the brink of war, because they're extremist dictators from a communist country. Communism always brings death and destruction. So let's punish them. Let's start pushing back and show them that we're going to defeat you economically with cheap little things that we can grow. And, you know, small communities can push back and take out a tyrant. We don't even need our military because we can't rely on them, and they're too expensive to operate. Expensive jet fighters, expensive naval vessels that require 50 or 60 personnel, when we could do the job of a handful of planes, a dozen planes, you know, a dozen little submarines that cost, you know, virtually nothing to make, because they're only basically underwater boats. They only have to go deep enough so they can't be seen. You know, they're just reconnaissance vehicles with a radio. So, you know, just some more ideas, guys.